Hi everyone, this is Isaac from Bible Bits, and today we'll be taking a look at the hymn I Asked the Lord That I Might Grow, written by John Newton, the same guy who penned Amazing Grace. And so I wanted to take a look at this hymn today because it's one of my favorites, and because I think the lyrics are really just applicable to the Christian life. It really does a good job of detailing suffering as a Christian and growing as a Christian. And so I hope that by looking at some of its lyrics today and analysing them a bit more, that you'll come to appreciate this hymn as much as I do. The hymn begins as such. I ask the Lord that I might grow in faith and love and every grace, might more of his salvation know, and seek more earnestly his face. So far, so good. The man in the hymn appears to be praying for all the right things. He's asking for faith, for grace, to be more earnest in his seeking of God, and to know his salvation more and more. Those are all things that as Christians we should definitely be praying for. 'Twas he who taught me thus to pray, and he, I trust, has answered prayer, but it has been in such a way as almost drove me to despair. Here we get our first hint that things might not have gone exactly the way the man expected. He's praying the way that God taught him to pray, and yet God has answered his prayers in such a way that's almost driven him to despair. I hoped that in some favoured hour, at once he'd answer my request, and by his love's constraining power, subdue my sins and give me rest. You see, the man expected God to quickly and immediately grant him everything that he prayed for, to receive the graces that he requested, and to be freed from the influence of his sins, giving him rest. However, instead of this, he made me feel the hidden evils of my heart, and let the angry powers of hell assault my soul in every part. Rather than instantly fixing all the man's spiritual problems and providing him with the graces that he asked for, God has instead appeared to do the opposite. He's afflicted the man and given him much suffering, exposing him to the hidden evils of his heart and letting the angry powers of hell assault him. To me, this means that he is exposed to temptation and the realities of his own sinfulness, things that would ultimately leave him feeling weak and perhaps even discouraged. Ye more with his own hand he seemed, intent to aggravate my woe, crossed all the fair designs I schemed, humbled my heart, and laid me low. You know, it's here where you'd expect God to intervene and to perhaps deliver the man out of his afflictions. And yet, rather than doing this, it appears that God is all the more intent on pouring salt on the man's wounds. Every plan and design that the man schemes appears to be crushed by God, leaving him feeling broken and low. Lord, why is this? I trembling cried. Wilt thou pursue thy worm to death? 'Tis in this way, the Lord replied. I answer prayer for grace and faith. Finally, the man has had enough, and he's crying out to God, Lord, why? Why have you done all this to me? Will you pursue me to death? And it is at this junction that God finally speaks, reassuring the man that far from intending to destroy him, he has done all this as a means of answering his prayers for grace and faith. These inward trials I employ from self and pride to set thee free, and break thy schemes of earthly joy, that thou mayst find thy all in me. And here the curtain is pulled away as God reveals that he has worked all these things for the sake of the man's sanctification, to break him free from his selfishness and pride. By laying the man low through his sufferings and his wrestlings, the man has learned that he cannot depend on himself and his own earthly schemes for joy, but rather he must depend on God and God alone for joy. You see, had God given the man everything he prayed for at once and sanctified him instantly, then the man would never have understood the depths of his own weakness, sinfulness, and idolatry. But as the man went through the trials, he was able to deepen his faith and grow in the graces that he asked for organically, instead of magically receiving them. You know, this hymn means a lot to me personally. As some of you might know, if you've watched some of my previous videos, this past year has been really tough for me. It just seemed to be one of those years where all the plans I made felt like they were being frustrated by God, and that everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so in those times, I just so often went back to this hymn and was reminded that my sufferings were never in vain, and that God was really using them for his own purposes, that I might be freed from my dependency on earthly schemes, and that I might find my all in God. And it just gave me a lot of peace, reminding me of that passage, Romans chapter 8, verse 28 to 29, and the fact that God was working all these trials for good, that I might be conformed to be more like my older brother Jesus. And while I'm definitely still working on finding my joy and contentment in Christ day in and day out, I know that without the trials that I've faced through the past year, I wouldn't be where I am in my faith today. It's also a great reminder for us to take prayer seriously, that if we do ask for things like grace and faith in seriousness, God will grant those things to us, but it might not be in the way that we like or expect. God will use trials often in order to answer our prayers for sanctification. So the next time you do ask for something like that, make sure you understand what you're asking for and be ready for the possibility that God may very well use trials in order to answer your prayers. Well, that's all the time we've got for today, but I hope that by going through the lyrics of this hymn, you've learned a thing or two about Christian suffering and growth. As usual, if you've got any questions or feedback, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you found this channel helpful to you in any way, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so that you can stay up to date with all the new content that we produce. Until next time, take care, have a lovely week, and I hope to see you soon.